My name is Dr. Joan Reed. I'm Dean for Culture and Community Engagement at Harvard Medical School, and I want to thank you for joining us today for our third event in our Opening Doors series, a conversation with Dr. David Nathan. Before we begin, I want to call your attention to Harvard Medical School's Rules of the Road. And it's reinforcing that this is a mutually supportive environment, that we're in this place to learn. No one's perfect. Invite others into the conversation. Words matter. The words we choose can hurt or heal. So be thoughtful, be respectful in speaking and listening, and realize that understanding is a part, empathy is a part of understanding. And recognize the difference between opinion and evidence. And with this, please be open-minded, and we'll turn to part of our program. The Opening Doors series presents conversations with Harvard Medical School faculty members who over time have made significant contributions to our community. These conversations ask faculty to talk about their professional journey, including how they first joined the Harvard Medical School community, changes that they have seen at our institution in the decades since their first arrival, and advice for recognizing opportunities and dealing with challenges into the future. This series is organized by my office, the Office for Cultural and Community Engagement, and also co-organized with the Ackerman Program on Medicine and Culture, Harvard Countway Library Center for the History of Medicine, and the HMS Center for Bioethics. Today, we are honored to be joined by Dr. David Nathan. For more than 6 decades, Dr. Nathan has shaped the field of hematology as a pioneering physician scientist, educator, and leader. Dr. Nathan's visionary research led to transformative advances in the understanding and treatment of inherited blood disorders, particularly thalassemia and sickle cell. As physician-in-chief of Boston Children's Hospital and president of Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, Dr. Nathan not only changed the trajectory of patient care, but also mentored generations of hematologists, leaving an indelible mark on the future of medicine. The recipient of the National Medal of Science and countless other honors, Dr. Nathan is recognized worldwide for his lifelong commitment to scientific discovery and passionate care. And before I turn this over to Dean Daly, I have to give my personal thanks to Dr. Nathan. When I first came on board here, not only as a pediatrician, but in fellowship and in starting some of the programs at the medical school, turning to Dr. Nathan, his door was open, his guidance was readily available. He was always supportive. Even when I wasn't sure of direction, he was there. And I want to thank you for that, Dr. Nathan. With that, I now turn this over to Dean George Daly, Dean of the Faculty of Medicine.
Thank you, Dean Reed, and thank you for organizing this series of conversations. We have the privilege of an extraordinary community, extraordinary faculty, but I can say I know of no one more extraordinary than Dr. Nathan. And I want to give a little bit of my own personal history with Dr. Nathan. I have been a mentee of David's for many, many decades, and there have even been occasions when I've followed his advice. Some of the bad decisions I've made were when I didn't follow his advice, but I think it's fair to say Dr. Nathan tried to recruit me into the pediatrics residency, advice I did not follow, sadly, because 23 or 5 years later, I ultimately did return to Children's Hospital, and he got his way. But very early on, when I was contemplating the deanship, I went to speak with David. And I recall your saying at the time, very much reinforcing my reluctance because the position was impossible and structurally flawed and all of that. And so we were very much in concert on that opinion. And then somehow you sought out Alan Garber, and you met with Alan, and you came back from that meeting and called me into your council, and you said, George, I think you can work with that man, and I think he has the best interests of the Harvard Medical School in his heart. And that changed my thinking. And in many ways, I have to say that Dr. Nathan is the reason that I ultimately assumed this position. Now, I don't know whether to thank you or to curse you for that influence on me, but I think I speak for many, hundreds of individuals in our community and many who are already here in the audience. You've had a profound impact on so many careers, and for that we are deeply, deeply grateful. You're one of the great figures in the history of Harvard Medical School, and it's just an honor to be here and be able to speak with you. Now, Joan had mentioned that these conversations often involve an exploration of what brought you to our community. What were the sort of formative aspects? And so I really want to go back to your childhood. Your mom was a social worker, so you had this sense of service that was very much genetic. So just tell us a little bit about your journey into Harvard and Harvard medicine ultimately.
Well, first of all, thank you, and Joan, thank you. It's really lovely of you to do this. And nobody wants to talk about history more than I do, because I've lived with it. And you're right that I was sort of brought up on Harvard. My father was sent to Harvard from Boston Latin School in the Abbott Lawrence Lowell period. By the way, there's all kinds of accusations these days about Harvard and anti-Semitism. I get furious when I hear that because these people don't know what anti-Semitism is. Anti-Semitism was very strong at Harvard under Abbott Lawrence Lowell. When Conant came in, which is when I started to be alive, it ceased entirely because Conant wasn't interested in social issues. He was interested in brains. If somebody was really smart, he wanted them at Harvard. And he didn't care who they prayed to at all. So, and anti-Semitism disappeared at Harvard under Conant, and it's never come back. That there's rudeness, that there's stupidity, that there's miserable behavior, that's got nothing to do with religion or religion intolerance. It's about people. People are difficult, and they sometimes never learn their lesson. So that's the period we're entering right now, together with a very difficult federal government. So that makes George's job horrible because he needs the federal government and he needs reasonable people to talk to. And my family life, when I grew up, it was with my father and my grandfather and my mother, who were enormous influences in my life, particularly my grandfather and my father, because they were so uproariously funny. In fact, I had difficulty making friends because nobody I knew who was my age was anything near as funny as my grandfather. And the dinner with my father and grandfather was just like going to the movies. I couldn't wait for dinner because then I could sit down and listen to the two of them go back and forth, imitating people. My sister had a boyfriend, I'll never forget that, and he said at dinner, Mr. Nathan, turning to my father, I'm afraid to leave because I know as soon as my back is turned, you're going to imitate me. I remember that I think it was very close to Thanksgiving or maybe at Thanksgiving. Anyway, they were my life. And my father was sent to Harvard from Boston Latin School. That was the route that kids from Boston went through to get to Harvard. And all you had to do was get to Boston Latin. Once you got to Boston Latin, you're a good student, you're going to Harvard. And that was it was just, nobody ever, the admissions committee didn't even think about it. They just took him. And there were about 40 kids who would get over to Harvard from one high school, Boston Latin School. That's where my father went. And he came to Harvard in 1916.
But
And
you didn't go to Boston Latin. You went to
I went to
Phillips
Roxbury
Academy.
Latin.
Oh, Roxbury
That's where,
Latin.
that was a very different school. It was a private
Roxbury
school.
Latin.
But it only cost $300 a year. That would be $3,000 in our time. It's probably now $30,000. And that's another little issue that we don't understand is costs of education. We can't figure that out. And I certainly can't figure it. Anyway, when my father graduated from Harvard, I've got to tell you one story before I forget it. When I came as a freshman in 1947, I decided that maybe my father was right, I should go to medical school. And therefore, I should take at least Chemistry 1 to see if I liked it. So I took Chemistry 1 in my first year, inorganic chemistry, very dull. And I wasn't sure I wanted to go to medical school. It was really boring. And, but when I walked up the steps on that first day, a little man with a green book bag came down the steps and looked at me. And I still had my name tag on because we had been at some reception for freshmen and all that. And he looked at me and said, Nathan, are you related in any way to Jeffrey, Nathan? My father. And I said, yes, he graduated in 1920. He said, well, I hope you're a better chemist than he was. That was George Shannon Forbes, who was the chairman of chemistry at Harvard. And I'll just never forget that interview. How could he possibly remember? In that sense, he was like Dorothy Murphy, who was the registrar of Harvard Medical School, came here as an 18-year-old high school graduate and took over the school because she had a phenomenal memory. When the computer people came in to sell Harvard computers, the guy said, you know, we're glad to sell you this whole setup, but I want to warn you, it ain't going to work as well as that woman. She remembered everything. And she trained others like her, Noreen Culler, great woman, you know, Dorothy Rackerman. These are the people who really ran Harvard. Deans didn't do it.
I still don't.
Nobody
Sorry.
can't do it. I can't do anything either. I don't know. I have to ask somebody, you know.
Well, so David, you were not enamored with chemistry.
Yeah.
What did you study? What did you do as an undergrad?
I decided I wanted to be a great writer. And I decided that I would major in English literature to my father's horror, and that nothing would stop me. So I did, and I just discovered something about halfway into it, particularly when I wrote my thesis. It was horrible. I wrote about Matthew Arnold, and Matthew Arnold was a big bore, and I realized I'm in a boring field. I don't want to do this. I'm going to listen to my father, and I'm going to go to Harvard Medical School if I can. So I all the time was taking science courses, even in the summer. I got interested in chemistry and quantitative analysis and that stuff, you know, just messing around in a laboratory. And I realized, you know, that in medicine you might be able to do something for somebody. If I sit here and write another rotten thesis like this, I'll never do anything for anybody. So I applied to Harvard Medical School.
Well, those of us who are on your email distribution list, I imagine there's a number of you in the audience who are regaled daily, multiple times, with your wit and wisdom.
Yeah.
I think we all respect the fact that you have become a tremendously wonderful, expressive writer. So it obviously has followed you in your career.
Yeah. Well,
So
I thought I was better than that I am.
he's very, very good. So all right, so you were English literature as an undergraduate. You fulfilled what I presume were pre-med requirements at the time. You must have aced your MCATs. Maybe they had MCATs, I don't know. But Harvard Medical School, you were here at Harvard, but you seem to have never left. You're worse than I am, but in some sense, or maybe you did take a foray to the NIH. What was your, I know that you didn't start at Boston Children's Hospital, so what was your path to
Well,
get
see,
to?
what happened to me in medical school was, first of all, the curriculum was much less stuffed than it is now. So we were allowed to have much more time. If, say, third-year medicine was 2 months, at least, maybe 3, where we were really, me and a partner would study one patient for hours and then write a big report on that patient. And that was, and I did that at the Boston City Hospital, where the Thorndike Laboratory was. And we really have to realize that Harvard was way behind on physician scientists, or that was really a Johns Hopkins thing with Osler and the people around Osler. And he was the one who really pursued this, and physician scientists started to pour out of Hopkins. They went to Michigan to get jobs, and they circled back and went to Rockefeller for basic training. And it really was an amazing development. They developed academic medicine. Harvard didn't. Harvard had the Massachusetts General Hospital, which was built, by the way, in what is it, 1782, by the Warrens, who built, Joseph, who died on Bunker Hill, didn't make it, but John and John Collins Warren needed a hospital. They had to get out of Harvard Hall, where they were giving lectures, and get patients. So they built a hospital, and that's why the MGH is the heart and soul of the Harvard Medical School. It really is. And when we fight with them, by the way, that's really terrible, because that's where it all started. And they built a great institution, and the others all came out of that in a way. Children's came out of MGH. They got mad at MGH. Everybody gets mad at MGH, and they leave.
That hasn't changed.
Yeah, that hasn't changed. They go, they're happy for a while, and they get mad, and they leave. And the children's was built on Huntington Avenue. But when Harvard built this fortress, I don't know how many of you have really looked around this place. We could hold this against the entire German army. It's absolutely, there's no way to capture the Harvard Medical School. The walls are,
They're very
how
thick,
are they?
yes.
I mean, you can't, they're enormous. And so they built this thing, and the children's came over to live next to them. They felt safer. Where they would be protected, I think. So they built the Children's Hospital there, and then slowly but surely, out from the Children's comes the Dana-Farber, and the Beth Israel showed up in the 30s to build a hospital. The Brigham was commissioned by the Harvard Medical School to be their teaching hospital. And what did they do? They didn't invite anybody from the Mass General, no one. Everybody came from Hopkins, which infuriated the Mass General. They never got over it. They never got over the snub of being uninvited to be the faculty when they'd been there since 1782. But people didn't like them, or I don't know what it was. But they brought them all up from Hopkins, and they did a good job.
Well, they've certainly turned the tide now.
Yeah.
given the fusion of Mass General and the Brigham.
And the Brigham,
but-
they,
yeah.
they finally absorbed them.
Yes.
They-
You trained at the Brigham.
Yes.
You're actually an adult internist, right? I mean,
Yes. Oh, yeah, I never
So how
thought
did
about
that
pedi-
happen?
My father begged me to go into pediatrics, but he begged me and said, you're just going to see old people like me. Don't do that. Bend the twig. I could hear him, bend the twig. And I said, no, they don't. They're just babies over there. I'm not going to do that. So I went to the Brigham.
Am I the only one who didn't get the reference about bending the twig? Could you explain?
Oh, that's
do I have to
from
go to
some,
ChatGPT
no,
and,
that's from
figure that out?
a poem I can't find anymore.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
See,
But that's
it's
what
that
he would-
English literature, English undergraduate. You see, it still comes
No,
back.
it was my father who did that. He was an omnivorous reader. And anyway, it's the school, the Brigham as an experience, you know, it's so interesting. There were only 10 interns, and none of them were women. There were 8 women in my class in the Harvard Medical School. There were no women after I came back. There were no women at NIH because women weren't drafted. So there was no reason for them to go to NIH. They could go whenever they wanted. But I had 2 children by the time I went to NIH, and I wasn't going to go to Korea or something.
So that was your only time away from Harvard?
It was
Then?
the
So
only
just
time.
As
I
a
got
yellow
to-
beret or whatever?
all that
at the
was, well, they
NIH?
weren't, we didn't feel like yellow berets at the time. We felt that we were going to do clinical research. We're going to learn it, and we're going to come back and do it. And I will never forget arriving in Bethesda and seeing a real hospital with a real new, magnificent hospital with, I think it had the capacity to have 500 beds, and it had labs on the same floor as the beds. And it was like heaven. I couldn't believe it, and I really had a great time there.
And where was the IRB in this hospital?
That was a problem. That was a real problem. There was no IRB. It was all up to us.
Right.
And I got into a lot of trouble on that. I don't want to get into it too much in public. But the facts are that my judgment about what was right and what was wrong was sucked up from my colleagues and faculty. Nobody thought about it. Nobody thought about it. Experimental medicine was, I'll tell you what informed consent was. Joe, lie down. That was it.
Right, right.
And it was a horrible system that nobody, including me, understood. So I think there have been a lot of improvements. But the thing is, NIH was the seed of the entire clinical research program for this country. And it was some of the directors of NIH were really fantastic people. And they made it all happen.
Well, I've heard you speak about the seamless integration, as you've intimated here, between the bench and the bedside.
Yeah.
And they were literally physically juxtaposed at the NIH. But
Yeah.
also the fact that you wouldn't have to go through months of IRB protocol review in order to draw blood on your patient. You could just bring it back into the laboratory. So things have changed. I agree that there certainly were some egregious exploitation of patients that we've read about. There can be a counter argument that today maybe there's too much regulation, but you grew up in a system that was very, very different. What are the other major transformations that you've seen in biomedical science investigation, the way hospitals work, the way academic science works? Because you've lived through a remarkable
I've lived through it.
revolution.
That's true, and I have, And I've always had the position that it's the people who matter. It's the quality of the nurses. So that's absolutely critically important. You have to have nurses who are there 12-hour shifts. They're seeing this patient. They know what's going on. If you're an intern, a resident, or a young investigator like me, we don't know. We're in the room, out of the room. We don't know exactly what's happening. And the nurses do know. So there has to be somebody who's on your team, that's hopefully a nurse, somebody with wisdom, who would say to me, because there weren't any committees to go to, don't do that. That's not a good idea. I'll never forget the nurses in the emergency room at the Brigham Hospital. I mean, people, some guy would come being lugged in shock, with pale as a ghost and near death, and I would say, "Oh, get the EKG machine, let's go here." And the nurse would say, "Uh-uh, blood bank, get him cross-matched." and she'd be absolutely right. I mean, I got more respect for nurses from that internship. Nurses like me. Why? Because I bow down. And I do, because they're a great profession.
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
Many an intern and resident and many a patient has been saved by the careful oversight of an experienced and wise
terrific.
nurse.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you trained in internal medicine at the Brigham.
Yeah.
But then history has it that you were ordered into hematology somehow.
That was at NIH.
How did that evolve?
When I went to NIH, I wanted to do liver disease. Why? Because I had a patient when I was in that third-year program who was assigned to me to work up for my presentation. And I finally figured out that he had that there was something wrong with him, because he wouldn't answer anything I asked him, nor did he move when I even pressed on his eyes to see if it hurt, and he wouldn't move. So I said, "My God, he's in a coma." And I've been standing here for 10 or 15 minutes doing nothing for this man in a coma. I'm going to get arrested, let alone given an E for my performance. I ran to the nurse's station and said, "My patient, he's in a coma. Call the doctor, a real doctor." And the nurse said, "Well, what are you talking about? He always does that after he eats lunch. And we were served lunch early. So he's in his nap. Forget about it. I'm sorry it won't work out. Don't try to work him up. He won't wake up for 2 or 3 hours." I said, "But what's wrong with him? Please call the resident. Call somebody. But don't just stick this on me." And she said, "Oh, all right." And she called the resident, and I could see him lumbering up the stairs with his stethoscope and his ophthalmoscope and his white coat. And he says, "What is it?" And he said disagreeably to me, "I told him, my patient, he's in a coma." And he said, yeah, we know that. He ate lunch. What are you talking about?" I said, "But I don't go into a coma when I eat lunch."
We just finished Thanksgiving. I think many of us were in a coma.
Right. Well,
Tyrone?
he said, "Why don't you do a physical exam, and maybe you'll figure it out." Okay. And of course, the guy had terrible alcoholic cirrhosis and severe ammonia toxicity. And I went, at least that's what the literature said. And I said, well, to the resident, "Well, what about measuring his blood ammonia?" And he said, "We can't do that because it's a gas, and we don't have the technology in the hospital labs to measure the gas." I said, you what? You don't, here you have all these people all falling asleep after lunch, and you don't have any way of measuring what it is?" And she said, "Yeah, we just can't do gases. That's all there is to it." So I said, "I'm going to figure out how to measure blood ammonia." And I went to the pathologist, who was Arthur Hertig. He was chairman of pathology, and said, "Would you give me some rats and I'm going to inject them with urease and make them make a ton of ammonia and see if they fall asleep. Well, Hertig, he was really a great guy. He knew that was one of the stupidest experiments you could ever do. But he gave me the rats, and he gave me some urease, and he gave me a syringe and a cage. And I injected these mice, and of course, nothing happened. The shunting is rather important in this pathophysiology, and the rats didn't have any shunting. So nothing happened, but it stuck in my mind. And that's why I wrote a thesis in medical school on the measurement of blood ammonia. I went to biochemistry, and then I realized something. If I can ally myself with real scientists, and I've got the patients, and I've got somebody to talk to, maybe I can really learn something. And I'm certainly not going to be able to do it on my own. And that's what got me to go to NIH, where I protested when they said, you're going to do hematology. Why? I remember saying that. Why? He said, well, tell me, doctor, how many stripes do you have on your sleeve? We were all in the public health service. And I said, 2. And he said, right, how many do I have? He said, 4. He said, that's why you're going to do what I tell you, which is hematology. That's where the action is.
Well, that was very good advice.
Yeah, it was.
Extraordinary. What is it about hematology that is so good for the balance of medicine and
because
science?
you've got everything. You've got the patient, you've got more crazy morphology, you have the whole capacity to test. You can get blood. That's where the problem is. You know, there were just 1,000 reasons why you could get, and absolutely true that hematologists pioneered clinical research. They really did. I didn't understand that, but I did once Don Thomas got the Nobel Prize. I thought that was probably good. He got it with Joe Murray, though, who transplanted kidneys. And another great thing about the Brigham, they were out there doing that stuff, you know.
So how did you get interested in the areas of thalassemia, sickle cell disease, those
That I can
hemoglobinopathies?
tell you right away. You have to thank the Mass General Hospital. They had a great gastroenterologist, Chester Jones, and he came over to do grand rounds at the Brigham, and we had a new patient who was a fruit salesman right around Fruit Street. Anyway, he was an MGH patient, but somehow, when he got really yellow and his abdomen began swelling, he came to the Brigham. But there are probably no beds at the MGH or something. And he'd been a patient at the MGH for a long time. Jones had supervised getting his spleen out years before. And he had, on X-ray, lumps all over his lungs. And everybody said, this guy's got abdominal cancer, and he's dying, forget about it. And I looked at his blood, and by that time I'd had enough training to know how to look at blood. And I said, there's something funny about this guy. This is not cancer. This is something strange about his red cells. They're bizarre. And I said, I think he's got thalassemia, but I've never heard of thalassemia in a 70-year-old man. They don't live that long. I didn't know anything about thalassemia intermediate. I just never heard of it. So I said, I'll take this slide over to Louis Diamond at the Children's Hospital, and he can look at it, and he can tell me whether I'm right or wrong. And he told me I was right, that this is thalassemia. And that just turned me on. I had to study that disease. And that's the way I am. But I've jumped from thalassemia to sickle cell disease to chronic granulomatous disease. And right over there is Stuart Orkin, who 25 years later cracked that disease.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think that's been so exciting for me, Every time I turn around, there's some new problem that I've never seen before, and I'm going to solve it. Not terribly well, but because I don't go deep, because the next thing I know, the phone will ring and there's another patient. I'm not focused enough to really make a great discovery on a very fundamental level. But I am a good carpet sweeper, you know, and I do know when something is important. And if
Well, I mean, one could argue that with your move to the Children's Hospital
Yeah.
and your building of the hematology oncology division,
Yeah.
that it's fair to say you had very good taste in the scientists, the physician scientists that you recruited,
Yeah.
and that division has had an extraordinary impact
Oh, yeah.
on therapeutics and the treatment of hemoglobinopathies, evolution of iron chelation, and now the use of CRISPR genome editing.
Yeah.
I mean, we're curing sickle cell
Yeah,
in some
that's
patients.
right. And I think it's been a journey for me. The reason I've never left is that I sometimes I just don't sleep at night thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow. It's really terribly exciting environment if you keep your eyes open and, you know, and watch for what's worth studying. And you can't study everything. Of course, I'm a sort of an everything guy because I wander around and I see these things and I'm very easily distracted. It's like, I don't know what to compare it to except a 3-ring circus. It's hard to keep your eyes on all the rings. and you may not be as good a lion tamer as you would have been if that's all you did was lion tame. So, but that's not my personality. If a patient comes into the clinic and the fellow is seeing that patient and I see something, then I'm going to jump on it and I'll use my lab to find out about it. That's a very different, that's what I thought clinical research was. It's getting much more complicated because genetics is a much tougher field to play around in. You really have to be a very good technologist, and you really have to focus, or you won't get anything done. You know. Whereas for me, it's been just one marvelous interaction after another. You know, and that's why I have made contributions. I know I did to chelation, and I know I did for thalassemia patients, and somewhat. I mean, here's an example. I'm the guy who thought that I understood why patients with sickle cell disease make fetal hemoglobin. And I don't want to get into that, but I think I figured it out. And then I figured out what might be done about it because other people were getting the idea of using cancer chemotherapy to treat sickle cell anemia. And I don't think they recognized the fetal hemoglobin part of that, but they certainly knew that that was an effective way. So I already knew that there was something there. And sure enough, we did help those patients. For a while, hydroxyurea was the only therapy approved for sickle cell anemia for about 25, 30 years until Stuart Orkin trained Vijay Sankaran. And they figured out what this was all about. I didn't do that. They did. And they did it because they were curious about why this worked, you know. And so to me, to be part of that is just a thrill. And now we're actually changing genes around.
Yeah.
That isn't David Nathan.
No, but it's an extraordinary part of your legacy, David.
Yeah.
You know, and it's
Yeah, we
it's a
got good
story that,
people.
yeah, that has played out over the decades. And I think it is another testimony to the importance of mentorship because you mentored both through the F1 and F2 generations,
Yeah.
that kind of passion for clinical science. I want to take you back to your relationship with one of the senior members of the Harvard community at the time, Dana-Farber. And I'd like to have you just, because maybe presaging some of the other insubordinate mentees, but you sort of disagreed with Dr. Farber on a few issues.
Well,
How did that evolve, and how did that impact
well, I can
your
tell you what the
career?
sort of final solution to that problem was. Fred Rosen, who was a wonderful immunologist and the protege of Janeway. Oh, by the way, you might I think this starts with why did I go to Children's Hospital? And I went because the patients were so fascinating, but I also went because the Brigham was kind of crumbling at the time. I didn't want to stay there. And I didn't want to stay because I didn't think that George Thorne was really running anything that was going to make a big, big change. And the facilities, I got to say, were really third rate. So I was looking hard at that point, and suddenly Charles Janeway called me and said, "Come over, I want to talk to you." Because by this time I was working a lot with their patients. And there was a fellow named Frank Oskey, who was a wonderful pediatric hematologist, a trainee of Diamond. And I'd worked a lot with him. So I'd been around the Children's Hospital. And he went over there and he offered me a job because at that time, Diamond had to retire because he was 65. And that was the rule at Harvard, you're out at 65. So that turned out to be illegal, but that was...
God, wouldn't it have been wonderful
Wouldn't
if
it
we
be
had that
wonderful for
today?
you?
Yeah,
Wonderful
I
for
just
you.
turned 65, so.
Yeah,
thank
yeah.
you.
So, anyway, I took his offer up because I loved Janeway. There were two people in my life I loved here, Janeway and Castle. Those two guys were the finest people I ever met in medicine, and I'll never forget them. So I went there, but the deal was, Janeway said to me, "Now we want you to come here and replace Dr. Diamond in hematology. We do not want you to get into oncology. And the reason is that Dr. Farber is oncology, and he won't like it. So I want you not to do that. Do not fight with Dr. Farber." I said, "That's fine. I don't want to do it. I did it at NIH, and it was terrible. Combination chemotherapy is absolutely necessary," I said, "but it's deadly to apply because kids get so sick." So he said, "Look," said Dr. Janeway, one day he said to me, "I've been thinking about what I told you about oncology. I want you to go see Dr. Farber because I had told Dr. Janeway that we had a problem at Children's Hospital in that there were no survivors of single-agent sequential chemotherapy. That doesn't work." And Janeway said, you got to go see Dr. Farber. So go see him and see if you can sell him on the idea of using combination chemotherapy. By that time, there were about 20% cures at St. Jude, at NCI, in Buffalo, in New York. So I went to see him because my family knew him. My uncle, my mother's brother, was one of the lead trustees. In fact, there's one guy right here whose father was involved with it. And my mother thought the world of Dr. Farber. She thought he was the greatest guy in the history of medicine because he was trying to cure children with cancer and had built this great institution, the Jimmy Fund. So I went to see him, and of course threw me out immediately because he shouted at me, "I am not going to murder," I can still hear this, "I'm not going to murder 10 children to save 2. I will not do that. Get out." And so I got out. And then I reported back to Dr. Janeway, and Janeway said, "Well, you know, he was probably in a bad mood. Why don't you go again?" And
Wear him down.
I began to think about it, and I did once more. I said, I'm going to go in there and really talk to him. And he, once again, gave me this cold shoulder and said that it was inhuman. And I said, look, Dr. Farber, I got the problem. These kids are coming in through the emergency room, and I am seeing them because they have blood disease. And then I find out they're leukemic, and I send them to you. And there are no survivors. Now, how can I continue to do that? I can't continue to do that. So I have to tell you something. If you won't treat them with combination chemotherapy, I'm going to send them all to the Mass General. Well, if you want to see a picture of fury, you should see that scene. He always was sitting with his white coat buttoned to his neck, with a white background behind him. He had dark hair and these coal black eyes and his pale face. And so it was just two eyes. That's all you saw. And he had this bird on his desk, this nasty stone bird about that high with a vicious beak. And that was always turned toward the person who was pitifully seeing there. I mean, he was a great actor. And he got up, purple with rage, and said, "Get out and never come back." And I said, "Well, okay, Dr. Farber, but I'm sending him to the Mass General." And went back, reported to Dr. Janeway. And Janeway, to his credit, he hated this kind of battle. But he said, "You know, I understand you, and I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to let you have the Clinical Research Center to put your patients on, and you treat them the way you want to treat them. And because that's the right thing to do." That's what I loved about the man. He didn't say much, but what he did say was always important. Mm. Well, a couple of days later, Farber, who loved my friend Fred Rosen enormously because he trained him, was walking with him in that Prouty Garden of the Children's Hospital. And Fred reported the following. He stopped walking and turned to Fred and said, "Dr. Rosen, are you familiar with Dr. Nathan?" And Fred said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I am." We were very close friends. And then, "Dr. Rosen, tell me something. Answer this question. How can such a dreadful man have such a wonderful mother?" And Fred's answer, it's classic, he said. His answer was, "Dr. Farber, I have no idea." So Fred couldn't wait to tell me this.
That is wonderful. Well, fortunately, the relationships between Children's Hospital and what is now known as the Dana-Farber Institute, which was originally the Sidney Farber Institute, are more mellifluous at this point. I'm going to open it up for some questions from the audience, but I'm going to, while people are thinking of it and gathering a microphone, I'm going to leave you with one final sort of just very open-ended question. You've had decades of remarkable experience here in the Harvard medical ecosystem. What is one of your, because I'm sure there are many, but your just most meaningful memories as a physician?
Oh, I can tell you right away. It's Castle and Janeway. Those two men inspired me. They really did. Janeway was actually more focused than Castle was, but Castle was always there for me. He was, no matter what the issue was, I could go to him and ask him. And he was such a gentleman and so wise. And I wanted to build that division the way he built the Thorndike. That's essentially what got me going. And I still see that man as a sort of a beacon. And Janeway the same way, honest to a fault, and really brilliant, caring about patients. I mean, when I watched Janeway study a patient at the bedside, or Castle, it was like a symphony. He immediately related to that patient. Both of them did. And yet he could turn around and take a guy like me and start teaching me too. I think it's the people who made this place. And yes, great things were done here in labs and in clinics, but for me it was them and people like them, you know.
David, it's still the people.
Yeah.
It's still the people, and that the idea that you would highlight two of these great mentors for you, you know, I have to say, you play that role for me and for so many here, and it's part of what makes our institutions so vibrant and timeless, because we'll pay it forward. We've got a couple minutes for questions from the audience. You can fire anything at Dr. Nathan. He's fearless in responding,
microphone.
as you can imagine.
There is a question from the Zoom, and it was, Dr. Nathan, what was your most proud moment at Boston Children's Hospital or at Dana-Farber?
Your most proud moment in medicine at the Children's or the Dana-Farber?
Oh,
Your
I can
most
tell you
proud moment.
that's a good question. It was the formation of the Dana-Farber Harvard Cancer Center, that pulling cancer together, which we desperately needed. We needed to pull the house together, and we are still doing it. You know, I know we have these battles with the MGH, and they have battles with us, but we are the Harvard Medical School. And now we've actually changed the name. I insisted on calling it Dana-Farber Harvard Cancer Center because Sidney had that grant since those grants were invented. He was the first recipient of a cancer center grant. I couldn't take it away from him. I felt, when I came in there for a short time as president, I had to make so many changes that, I mean, the place needed a complete cleanup, you know. And I was the agent for doing that because I don't mind doing that if I have to do it. And a lot of people can't stand it. But I didn't want the trustees to face another loss of Dana-Farber's name. So Joe, the dean at the time, what's the matter with you?
Joe Martin.
Joe Martin.
Yeah, he's really failing.
He accepted that idea, but now we're going to change the name. We're going to make it. It'll be much more like the Harvard Cancer Center or something like that. It won't be the name, but it'll still, the grant will still be managed at Dana-Farber, and I think that's a reasonable solution to a very tough problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah,
That's a wonderful part of your legacy, Dr. Nathan. And indeed, the Harvard community, in all of its institutions and its remarkable number of scientists and clinicians who've really changed the face of medicine, we are continuing to function as a strong consortium that will go on, and we will carry that far into the future. So thank you. Other questions?
Saul Wisnia in Publications, Communications at Dana-Farber. I've been there since you started at Dana-Farber, or ended at Dana-Farber in 2000, so I go back a long way with you. What has you most excited about the future of clinical research and cancer care, especially as Dana-Farber is moving towards creating its first, inpatient hospital?
I think the future is just massive. I think we're going to make huge strides very soon. I wish I could just get somebody to give me a few more years so I could watch it. I mean, at 96, you can't count too many pebbles. The facts are, we're on the verge of understanding cancer. And that's the only way we're ever going to, doing this kind of stuff I do, which is, let's try this. That isn't going to work. The cancer cell is just too smart. And every time you feed it something, it says, oh, well, I've got 500 other cells in here that don't have anything to do with that gene, so I'll just let them everything else can die, and I'll have my 500 cancer cells, and you won't be able to treat me. So that's what's happening now. We have to catch every cell. And the biggest issue right now in pediatrics is brain cancer. That damned illness, which takes young people and destroys them, that's what I would work on. Because it's just an enormous challenge to people, young people get it. And the bad brain cancers, every cell is different. How do you plan a combination chemotherapy if you have thousands and thousands of cells and none of them are anything like their neighbors? That's a problem. It's going to take huge amount of basic science to solve. Okay, I know David Nathan can't do it. That I'm sure of. I would fire him in a minute. You have to really have brilliant people who are on top of that problem and solve it. And if we could do that in the next 50, I think it's going to take 50 years to get that disease under control. But heck, we've been doing this for much more than 50 years. We can do it.
We've made some good progress, but there's more to come.
Yeah.
I think we can take one more
There's-
question.
There's a question that came in online. Could you give us some advice for the younger people, the young scientist or physician
Oh,
or
yeah.
medical student, some advice for them?
Follow your nose. That's what you got to do. I mean, science is all about an individual or group of individuals asking a tough question. So you have to just allow people to follow their own curiosity. The great people in medicine were all people who tackled a problem that nobody could solve. I mean, think of it, the treatment of syphilis, and the gradual understanding that this is an organism that is causing this. We know what it is. We've got to find the juice that'll kill it. And it turned out to be penicillin, which was an amazing fact. That was an accident. But we have to give people the ammunition, and we have to give them the backing to just go for it. There aren't that many good people. Good meaning great scientists and compassionate. That's very hard to do. And so I know we can do it because I've seen it and I've been part of it sometime, but I know we have to keep pressing. And we have to give people liberty to be pressers. It's freedom that's really important. And I hope and pray that at least brain cancer, that's all I ask right now, brain cancer, get it done.
Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Nathan, before I turn it back over to Dean Reed, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. You are, without a doubt, among the most extraordinary physicians I've ever encountered in my career.
Oh, what a thing.
Your combination of just wisdom, your remarkable enthusiasm, your focus on the patient. It's always the patient. It's a combination that is what has made you so inspiring and so influential. So I just want to thank you for this conversation, but I want to thank you in a grander sense on behalf of Harvard Medical School for all that you have brought to our community.
George,
Thank you.
it's an honor and a privilege, believe me.
Here, here. Dean Reed.
Thank you. And I want to add to that, thank you. I want to thank you for saying yes to sharing your insights and your wisdom. I just find it remarkable that you have had such a tremendous career. And as you sit here, you exude excitement and curiosity and energy and this openness to possibility. And for me, that's what we need in medicine. And you do it in a way that says everyone should do it in their own way. And so thank you. Thank you for the gift of you.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Here, here.